Good evening, everyone. This is Joyce Davis, and I am the new lay leader of the Susquehanna Conference of the United Methodist Church. Of course, I ask for your prayers, but I'm here because we want to engage in a community conversation, part of a national effort, something going on throughout these United States to help bridge what we see as the divide between police, our beloved police, and our beloved community. But before we get started, I'd like to invite our bishop, Bishop Jeremiah Park, to offer some opening remarks.
Greetings. I am Bishop Jeremiah Park, serving the Susquehanna Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, which comprises some 850 churches in the central and northeastern part of the state of Pennsylvania. Welcome to our Faith and Blue panel discussion. We offer this to strengthen peace and justice in our region by building bridges between law enforcement and the communities they serve, particularly communities of color. We in the Susquehanna Annual Conference believe that all people are made in God's image, and each and every one has sacred worth. We are appalled by the sin of racism and how it harms God's people as individuals and communities. Instead, we embrace the vision of God's beloved community. In this vision, all people share in the wealth of the earth and treat one another with respect and dignity. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice are replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Love and trust triumph over fear and hatred. We are participating in the Faith and Blue initiative as part of our work to make the beloved community a reality. When relationships are built on respect and trust, people are much less likely to be targeted or threatened because of the color of their skin. Law enforcement officers are more likely to see people of color not as subjects of suspicion, but as neighbors they serve. And the citizens are more apt to see enforcement officers not as people to fear or avoid, but partners in building up their community. Everyone will be more likely to see each other as partners, not adversaries. I invite you to open your hearts and minds to what our panelists will share in this presentation. Bring to them your honest concerns. Let's take steps to build strong relationships for sound and healthy communities that embody healing and a future filled with hope. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Bishop Parks, for those really insightful opening remarks. But I want to emphasize that we are not alone in this conversation, that we are really doing what people around the country are doing for this entire weekend. It is called the National Faith and Blue Weekend. And it is an effort to bring together law enforcement and faith institutions, key pillars of our community, when they work together to help solve whatever problems we may be facing. Who are we? It is a coalition really of law enforcement membership and professional organizations in the United States that is also collaborating with people of every faith tradition. This effort is being co-convened by MovementForward, by the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, and by A&T, all kinds of corporations and foundations throughout the country that wants to engage people of faith in addressing what we see as a serious divide in our communities. So with that, we have brought together, I think, a panel of experts, people representing different aspects of this that include law enforcement, that include the voices of young civil rights and protesters, as well as our faith leaders. And so we're going to get right into our discussion. Representing law enforcement, we have Scott Bohn, who's executive director of the Pennsylvania Police Chiefs Association, and himself a former police chief from Westchester. Welcome, Chief Bohn.
Hi.
Very good.
Myself, there we go. Good morning. Good afternoon, Joyce. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And of course, we have a man I worked with for 5 years. I came to quite respect and to know what a hard job he has, Commissioner Thomas Carter. Welcome, Commissioner. I think you got unmuted. Try again. There you go.
Thank you. And
right.
It's an honor to be here with these great panelists.
Absolutely. And representing our young people, I want to introduce Brent Lipscomb, who is with Black Lives Matter. Brent, where are you there?
I am right here. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am very excited to be able to have such a phenomenal discussion on issues that affect our nation and our community within itself. So
wonderful, Brent. It's really great to have you here. And another young man who I try to keep in check, but not quite able to, is my son, Cole Goodman. He has been out there protesting as well. Cole, would you say hello?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for the discussion.
All right. And of course, our faith leaders, Reverend Sledge, who's pastor, a really dynamic young pastor with the Journey Church in Harrisburg. Pastor Sledge, would you say hello?
Hi, friends. Thank you so much, Joyce, and good to be with you all this evening.
Very good. And of course, we have the Dean of the Bishop's Cabinet, and that is the Reverend Barry Robison. How are you, Barry, today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Joyce. Appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. And of course, we invited Samia Malik, who has a representative of the Muslim community, and she has been involved in as an activist herself and in bridging this divide between protesters and the faith community. Samia, would you say hello for us? Samia, are you able to unmute? I'm not sure if... Oh, we may have lost. Oh, Samia, there you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be among all of you. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Okay, very good. Well, you guys can leave yourselves unmuted because I hope it'll be a dynamic conversation. So it won't, you can just jump in wherever you feel important. But let's start, first of all, with trying to give an understanding, an overview of what is the divide. We know that we have police on one side and we have our protesters on the other side. So why don't we start with our young activists? Why, Brent, are you out there? Why are you protesting? What is all of this about?
There's a lot of spaces and constructs that we can identify that this is about. It's from bias, it's from racism, it's from discrimination. When we look at America as a whole, it is in a space of divisiveness. And I think young people are currently advocating and stressing the importance of transparency and accountability. It's something that has been a fight for a very long time throughout many years and centuries. And our nation has come to a point of always giving us the response of the time will come instead of the time being now. And I think young activists and the marginalized communities across the nation are finally being awakened and coming to identify that instead of there being a response from our leaders and elected officials and people that are held in these positions or sworn in, we need to have solutions. So we are stressing and fighting for change and for policy revisions that will allow us to be able to say, this is not a response, but this is a solution. And this is something that we want to see that's actionable. And I think that's really important to stress, that we find things that are actionable, because of a lot of times we see policy changes that are, I call them pacifiers for citizens across the world, but they don't do anything or they don't make any change into their lives. So we want to see things that are in place that are actionable.
Okay, well, Cole, what you want to add your thoughts in here? You've been out there several times. I actually stood with you at the first one when everything seemed like it was going to be peaceful as it could be, and then something happened. I don't know, but why are you out there? And why have you gone to so many of these?
Sure. So for all the reasons that Brent said is absolutely why we're out there. And I'd just like to add on that we are absolutely looking for legislative, tangible change in policies to go through, whether it be the House of Representatives, whether it be Congress, on police reform. But we're also looking to structurally change many organizations and departments across this nation that were built on racism, oppression, repression, and depression of marginalized communities and people of color. We're out there because we are the generation that is saying enough is enough. We are the generation that does not want to see any more Black bodies being killed and murdered on national TV by, yes, a few bad apples of people who are supposed to put their hand on a Bible or swear an oath to protect citizens of our community. I'm incredibly excited to be on a panel with progressive police chief like Chief Carter, who has really strived to work with us Black Lives Matter activists. But the reality is that we need all police chiefs, all police departments to realize that it's time for reform. It's time for example, a banning of chokeholds. It's time for police across the nation not to have immunity. It's time for enacting legislation that says if a cop sees another cop do something bad, they by law have to intervene. That's not on many books in municipalities. So we're the generation that is saying enough is enough. We're no longer going to be silent. We're no longer going to kick this can down the road, because if we do, it is life or death for people of color across this nation. Now, my last point is that many of us out marching, and I just want to make this clear, we are not marching against every individual police officer. Actually, many of the reforms that we are marching for will help police do their job better, will take stress off police in doing the hard job that they have to do. So there, of course, looting and rioting and such has been brought up because yes, it has happened and we do not condone that. But the majority of us who have gone out and protested have done so peacefully, and we're not going to stop until not only is there justice, and we're not going to stop because without any justice, there can't be any peace. Thank you.
All right. Well, Commissioner Carter, the wiser heads here, let's hear what you have to say. I mean, you've heard these young people and you heard the passion that they're bringing. And I hope you've also heard from these two some respect for what you're having to deal with. So let's turn it over to you. Do you want to start, Chief Bohn, and then we'll turn it over to Commissioner Carter?
Sure. I jotted, thank you, Joyce. I jumped down at a couple of comments, and what struck me initially and kind of resonated through both sets of comments was the realization that what they have now communicated are things that do exist, or what I've often professed to police chiefs in the Commonwealth is we're not doing a very good job of educating the public what we do and do not do. I think if you look historically at the problems that were raised, and I often bring this up, you know, whenever any person and or community feels marginalized, and certainly in light of the current situation with the pandemic, there are so many underlying social issues that impact this conversation and other conversations. Food insecurity, housing, drug addiction, unemployment, of course, as I mentioned, budgets. social services in our communities, and one that is more subjective, that certainly maybe because I'm a baby boomer, that I've noticed over time is the erosion of common courtesy. So, you know, as we have looked at this, and I believe it was Cole was the last person to speak, many of those things that he is talking about, we are preaching it and do exist. Now, that's not in and of itself a solution, but best practices, standards, professionalism, a great number of agencies, and we've certainly encouraged them, and you can go to our own site. We're transparent with what those policies are and what they are not, but it still requires, and I think that Commissioner Carter, and I've often used him as an example, does an excellent job because he's going beyond that and actually connecting with his community at a community level and engaging in those dialogues. Now, I have had a number of conversations that I've been pushing, and certainly with some members of the Black Caucus, I feel very strongly about legislation with the duty to intervene. It does not exist in the state of Pennsylvania. Our professional standards do include the duty to intervene, and in a very short period of time, I'm going to be presenting a program that deals specifically with that topic and helping police themselves.
So that duty to intervene, just so that our participants can understand, that means if a police officer sees another police officer misbehaving or doing something wrong, that police officer has a duty to try to stop it?
Yeah, you know, Joyce, I think the best example is the one, the horrific, if not just tragic incident in Minnesota, where you had the officer with his knee on the defendant's neck for over 8 minutes, and 3 officers standing nearby and nobody taking any action to intervene. And that certainly goes both ways, because we've seen certain situations where officers have not intervened and police officers have gotten injured or hurt. But we have to do, and we're continuing to try to educate police officers. And I think it's more important that we educate the public as well, which is why I often encourage this type of dialogue. I think it's critically important. I am a fan of, and you're now part of my fan club, whoever mentioned actionable steps, because narrative is narrative, but you know, any discussion, at the end of that discussion, we should be looking towards solutions. There are oftentimes, as we look over legislation, that we find solutions looking for problems. I think we need to look at the problems, and we need to identify viable solutions that are going to have an impact, and a positive impact, on the public and the police and their service to that public.
Okay, let's bring Commissioner Carter in here. I think what I heard was that you do agree that there is a problem, that there's something that needs to be addressed. It's just how it's addressed. I hope I'm interpreting that right. But Commissioner Carter, would you want to step into that conversation and let us know what you heard and whether you think they have valid reasons for protesting?
And they do, and I agree with them. I've talked to Brent, I've talked to Cole several times. I admire both of them, you know, and I want to congratulate them, because when they do protest, you know, I know who to go to, I know who to contact, and they have a vision, they have a plan, and they have a purpose. A lot of protests do not have leaders, and they don't have a purpose, but these 2 young men, you know, they have a purpose, they have a vision. And it's one thing that I want to say is that back in the 60s, when I was growing up, you know, back during the King riots, you know, it was almost the same thing that is going on right now. It was violent, there was division between police, community, and what have you. And I pray that we can stop saying this here, and we can stop doing this here, is that yes, there's people of color, there's white people, there's people of color, but we're all people, and let's apply the law equally to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And if we learn to do that there, then that would stop half of the problems. Now, I believe that the use of force should be changed. You know, you got to look at the use of force, you know, because every state is different. In Harrisburg here, we just changed our policy, and my officers, they have an absolute right to intervene if someone is doing something wrong and mistreating the public. You know, that can't come from the legislators. That got to come from the police chief. It comes from the top down.
Before we go on, is what the commissioner is saying, is that resonating with other police chiefs throughout our area, Chief Bohn?
Yeah, I think so, Joyce. And the earlier point that the commissioner made is really important. You know, the vast majority of protests have been peaceful. We've certainly observed a violent protest, you know, certainly here in our state. And understand that the law enforcement end of this is, you know, to protect the constitutional right of those persons to engage in a peaceful protest, to also protect those who choose to protest against them, and to protect those who choose not to protest at all. It's a real challenge. I think the commissioner has done an excellent job with that. It does put law enforcement in a very difficult situation, but I think we have, outside of just the law, a moral and ethical obligation to protect those rights.
Well, let me bring in some of our faith leaders here, because two of them, I've seen them out there in the streets. So let me talk to you, to Samia. Would you just give us your thoughts as a Muslim, as a faith leader, because you're also part of the Mayors and the Faith Advisory Council and the Interfaith Alliance, and I think you're with the Community Responders Network. You're really out there. What role do you see? Do you see the problem? What role do you see faith leaders playing?
Absolutely. I have the highest respect for police. Every day they go out, they put their lives in danger, but there's a definite problem here. You're talking about communities. Communities of color, it takes a village, right? So these communities are socially, there's inequity there. Okay, you're telling the children in those communities, do as I say and not as I do. Because if they're addicted, or if their father is in prison, what happens to them? So we need to take care of these communities, make sure there's literacy, make sure there's no poverty, everybody's fed well. There's you know, amazing after school programs and babysitting in the morning, daycare, all of that. We have to take care of that first, okay? Then that will produce less people that are lost, that are addicted, that have mental issues. And then for the police itself, I think, as much respect as I have for police, if they have 10 police officers, they need to get rid of at least 3. Have one mental health profession, have one, you know, somebody who can, conflict resolution person, and one that can, you know, conflict resolution and mental health, and a social service person.
So you actually see a whole different style of policing. So
I do. Okay. I do.
Okay.
And yes, sometimes I feel the origins of police here is catching slaves, right? That is the origin of policing here. Go look it up. And sometimes the remnants of it has stayed. They've been indoctrinated in the police training.
Can I respond to that, Joyce?
Yes, please, sir. Please.
You know, I hear a lot of people saying, you know, that the origin of policing is like, you know, being slave catchers. And that's not the case. Back in the slavery days, it was vigilantes that captured slaves. Police officers are sworn professional people. We don't capture slaves. We have the utmost respect for people. You have to look at the amount of calls that police go on nationwide, even in the city here, and compared to the amount of bad incidents that take place. You know, I mean, people don't think about that. You know, I can speak for myself, my officers here. We have the utmost respect for the Harrisburg citizens. We love our jobs, and I come here every day to work. I put my life on the line. My officers do every day, because we want to protect and serve the citizens of our city.
Agree.
And
I know that for sure.
I'm sorry, Joyce. I
Yes,
wanted
go
to make
ahead, sir.
Yes, I just want to make clear, and I agree wholeheartedly with the commissioner's comment. But I would just like to, and not necessarily issue, it doesn't take a bullet. You know, police officers are confronted with, in some instances, life and death situations where they're having to make split-second decisions. I think the failure is if the perception of the community, and that is the belief, that is something that we have to work to correct, because as the commissioner said, the overwhelming majority of police officers in the Commonwealth are well trained. I think it's a noble profession, and they're doing a job that their primary responsibility outside of that oath is protecting the public.
Well, let's bring our pastors here. Pastor Sledge, you've been listening to this, and I know you've been raring the comments. So what are your thoughts at this juncture?
Yeah, I think this is a great conversation, and I'm just struck, for me, just like the death of George Floyd just continually reigns in my mind. And for 8 minutes and 47 seconds or 46 seconds, and so I think for me, from my perspective as a faith leader, not being a police officer, but respecting our police officers in our city, I kind of come to like an ethic of life. And so I kind of come to this conversation is how can all of us, police officers, community leaders, friends like Brent and Cole, how can we all continue to kind of speak for life? And so I remember after the death of George Floyd, our church just had a 1-hour prayer service that some of our people of color from our church just got to tell their story, and Cole was a part of that. And I think part of my role as a church leader is just to help tell the story of real people's lives that are being impacted by our policy, that are being impacted by our policing, that are being impacted by real things in our world. And so I just remember after that prayer service, Joyce, like so many people in my church, in the community, white people who had never heard the story of Black people and having interactions with the police, never had that story, never heard the story. And so I just see my role as a faith leader is how can we just tell the story of real people, and how can we have an ethic of life, of just supporting life. And that means, for me, the life of a Black male who's unarmed in a city and the life of a police officer. And so for me, it's not an or, but it's an and of life. And so I think this conversation is so essential that all of us together are just seeking kind of the goodness in the life of people. And so I'll start with that, Joyce.
Well, what I'm relieved to hear, though, is that we have our two very highly respected law enforcement people finding common ground with these young people to say, we know things aren't right, but we're working to get there, and to join hands with them to try to get there. Listen, you know there's a problem, because when I talk to my dear white sisters and I explain to them, yes, I've had to sit my son down and tell him, if you're ever stopped by a police officer, and not only that, I had a 10:30 curfew for him so that I didn't want him ever to be stopped late at night and not. So there are different conversations. Where do you put the papers for the car? You never go in the glove compartment. I mean, these are real conversations that we have, and real worries of Black mothers who have sons. These are real. But Reverend Robert, I want to bring you in here, because clearly you're looking at this trying to figure out what role can faith leaders, can pastors, can lay leaders play in this kind of dynamic? Has it presented, is it something that you think maybe we just need more education on? What are your thoughts?
More education definitely would be helpful. But part of it, I think, we're not so much struggling to understand the issues, but I think to accept them, that they're there. The reality that I encounter up through my ministry, and I think is prevalent in many places now, is, well, that's not an issue in my church. That's not in my backyard. That's not in my community. And so we develop a tunnel vision and kind of tune things out. We're prone to do that in anything, but particularly in an area which raises conflict and can also challenge us to begin to question our beliefs and how we live out our faith in our communities. But as far as education, we need that understanding of others, of other cultures, of other faiths, of other traditions. I confess it was only probably within the last 5 or 10 years where I was in conversation with a Black father who shared with me exactly what you just said, that his son would travel in the car with his driver's license up by the steering wheel on the dash.
Yes.
Because,
yes.
you know, of not having to reach into the glove compartment. I had never heard that before, never even realized that that was the reality that a lot of folks live under. And that's just one small example of that kind of thing. I think in some ways, we in the faith community have lost the sense of being the conscience of the community. Again, that tunnel vision comes in, and we're so focused on our own individual faith community or church family that we tend to tune out the larger issues around us. And as I kind of thought about some of these things, you know, I realized there are fewer and fewer people who lived through the social upheavals of the 60s, as Commissioner Carter referenced. And because we haven't experienced those firsthand, some of this seems very strange to us and foreign. But we've also forgotten the role that faith communities played to help bring resolutions to those struggles back in the 60s. And I have to struggle myself to think, well, all that's behind us. We took care of it back then. And obviously we have not.
You know, that it's interesting you said that, because one of the apologies I've given to this younger generation is that we were supposed to have taken care of this. This should not be a problem for my son. It should not be a problem for the next generation. Something we didn't do right. I don't know what it was, but they're at it now. But let me do this. We have got a question that I want to address from Reverend Mick Dawes, I believe. And he's 2 questions he wants, but let's take the first one. He says he wants us to discuss respect for authority. The lack of respect for law enforcement officers and others in position of authority is troubling to him. And even more troubling is that it is being taught and promoted. How can we teach and promote respect for those in authority and really for everyone? And I'm going to throw that to our young people. The first thing I thought of when I heard that was that, well, protesting is not necessarily disrespect, but you have to challenge injustice or it will never be dealt with. But Brent, why don't you take that one? Are you being respectful?
Thank you for allowing me to take that. And I'm so glad you guys brought up a lot of points, and I do have to hit on them because I cannot allow that information to just sit here. The first thing that I want to hit about is Chief Carter brought up the origin of policing. I am a PhD candidate of public administration who specializes in criminal justice. So I have a lot of scholarly background in criminal justice. So when we talk about the origin of policing, the 1800s, policing in the North was developed from England. And in our southern states, they actually did take a slave patrol method. And the concepts were surrounded around law and order. There were 3 things that our southern states had to focus on in the 1800s. And actually, we can even go back to the 1700s, because in the 1700s in the Carolinas was when our first slave patrol was actually presented in the US. So in these 3 things, the goals were to chase down and return to owners. The second thing was to provide organized terror to revoke slaves. And the third thing was to provide discipline of law. So when we say that policing actually comes from slavery, it actually does. It actually does in the US. Our northern sides, yes, we do take a side of from the colonies and from England, but in the southern states, it took a different path. And that path has kind of expanded to be one of the bigger paths, which, and this is what basically caused our American Revolution. The next thing was, Scott Bohn, you said whenever a person feels marginalized, Well, marginalization is a construct of oppression, and it is a system with a generational effect. So when we say that and we look at how can, we talk about policing being oversight to policing. So looking at those systems of what's happening to our individuals and our citizens, and also looking at the blue wall of silence and all these other things, do we truly believe that oversight can exist from the police, or how do we get there? Because there are structures, and again, these structures come back from the beginning of times and the foundations of how we build our institutions in America that still exist. How do we move past those structures to be able to give to people that true accountability and transparency? And I'm going to hit on everything that you said. I'm coming to the question, I promise you.
Okay. All right.
I just had to get this off my chest really quick. And the last thing that we talked about that I wanted to kind of dissect a little bit was we talked about marginalization a little bit. The marginalization, what it does, it stems into mental health. It stems into all of these different sectors that create a snowball effect within our communities. And this is why you're steadily seeing oppression, you're seeing economical issues, you're seeing classism issues, and all these other things, which basically leave you with a community that's full of disparities. And now we're expecting something different. We're expecting this community to be able to function just like our white communities, or just like our privileged communities. It doesn't work that way. That's just social construct. So we have to, as leaders and as officials, we have to dissect the difference between social constructs and how do we maneuver the social constructs to be able to provide equity for all. Now, back to the question that you asked me, Ms. Joyce.
Well, yeah, but just to stop there, because you're talking at a very elevated level, and I really want people to understand what you're saying. I think you're saying clearly that there are two systems that develop. Chief Carter is from the frozen north here, so maybe he doesn't know what it's like in Louisiana. Maybe it really did develop differently there. But the other question is that because the African-American community has descended from people who were enslaved and who were oppressed, that has left a lot of disparities, health disparities, education disparities, other things that they are still having to grapple with. And that sometimes may make us a little crazy. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And not only does it make us a little crazy, but when we say mental health issues, you see a lot of people that crime and mental health they have a parallel line with each other. So when you're seeing your levels of crime increase, why are they increasing? Are they increasing because of mental health? And if they're increasing because of mental health, why is mental health such an issue in a certain demographic?
All right. So Brent, let me, because I know Commissioner Carter wants to respond. So Commissioner Carter, I'm going to let you have it, and then Chief Bohn, if you want to chime in, go ahead, guys.
The only thing that I want to say, I agree with most of what he's saying, what Brent is saying. But, just to clear one thing up and not to go back and forth, because I like Brent, I respect him, but police officers are sworn. Back down south, back then, they were not sworn. And if you look at what was going on back then, it was a lot of revolting going on back then with the slaves, especially in Virginia. And Thomas Jefferson, who helped to write the Constitution, if you look at the Second Amendment to the Constitution, they had to, and the governor of Virginia, I forgot his name right now, they had to do something to keep the slaves straight in line because they were revolting too much back then. So that's why the Second Amendment was born. It wasn't the right to bear arms, it was to keep the slaves in line. The federalities did it, I'm
learning something today. Thank you. Wow.
If you look at things, our first 5 presidents came from where? Virginia.
Yeah.
Because Virginia was the biggest slave state back then.
Yes.
And my family is from down there. I come from a slave family. I can run it down to you.
All right. Well,
You know,
listen, what is clear to me, though, you see how it eventually resorted to discussion of slavery? That is at the root of almost everything we're still dealing with right now in our country.
If I can say this here, Joyce, I said this here earlier. If we look at people as people and quit applying the law differently in different neighborhoods, but apply it equally across the board, we wouldn't have some of the problems that we have now. And to me, that's one of the biggest things that we have to straighten up. People are people. And if you're a police officer, your responsibility is to get to know the people that you are policing. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have nationwide. They don't know the people that they are policing. And that's why we have some of the bad actions of police officers, because they don't know, they're a little scared. They were taught, you know, that we are different. Nobody's different. We're all the same.
Chief, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just a few points. That's a lot of information. Going back to Bishop Robinson's, I think the faith-based community plays a great role. I know in my former life, the most impactful and perhaps the most informative conversations that we engaged in, we call them courageous conversations. Those are the types of conversations where people do feel uncomfortable, but they have to have those types of conversations. I'm sure the commissioner, and I'm not asking him this question directly, I'm sure that he felt an equal, if not more, an amount of disgust when he viewed the incident in Minnesota. And I think you'd be very hard pressed to find a police officer who wasn't completely disgusted by what they saw. You know, the other part of policing is to the point that I think the commissioner and Brent were speaking to. As our communities have evolved over time, so have our policing communities. You know, please keep in mind, and it's a point that I made earlier, all of you and your professions, you're drawn on and you come from our community. That's our pool. And the same thing applies to police officers. And to the commissioner's point, and I agree, those officers take an oath and they have a greater responsibility. But it does get back to the whole concept of communicating with the public, building trust. Trust is earned, and being as transparent as we possibly can. I think we are now in a culture where our people want immediate answers, are quick to judge without knowing all the facts and circumstances. And I think it's really important that we take a step back and look at the real core issues and what we're dealing with here, and try to address those issues in a meaningful way that will have impact. Otherwise, it's just continued narrative.
Yeah, Chief, have other police chiefs like Commissioner Carter sat down with some of these young protesters and at least just tried to develop that rapport? Have you heard of those kinds of meetings happening?
We have, and I know that a lot of those conversations have also incorporated our faith-based communities or leaders and elected officials. Keep in mind, and I'm sure the commissioner can appreciate this point, police officers or police departments don't legislate the law. They enforce the law. The police department is the most visible form of our government. They're also the most accessible form of government. They're on the front line. So fortunately or unfortunately, we bear the brunt of a lot of the angst that exists in the communities. But it's critically important that we communicate, and certainly chief law enforcement officers communicate the position of their departments and their belief systems. Because I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing.
Absolutely. I'm just delighted. I really am delighted to hear that there is an acknowledgement, as Barry Robinson said, that there is an issue. There is a problem that needs to be addressed. That's a long way. If we can get our congregations to accept that, we've gone a long way as well. But let me do this. I want to come back. Yeah, but I wanted to come back to this issue of, I'm going to come back to you, but there's a question that's come in from Reverend Paul Amara I wanted to throw out at you. A question, he says, is why is police brutality so prominent in the United States as compared to different policing in other Western nations? As panelists representing law enforcement, are there any discussions that happen in your ranks and files? I mean, I think he brings up a good issue because I've lived now 3 times in different countries, and there isn't the same sense of fear of the police in many other countries as there is here, at least among minority populations. Do you guys want to address if you see this different in other countries, or what is it here that makes it such an issue?
If I can, Joyce, I would like to say that sometimes, you know, policing is brutal. Use of force is never pretty, okay? Especially when you have cameras and cell phone and social media going on, as it is right now. In other countries, you know, they don't do social media the way that we do social media here. Do I agree with the brutality that goes on sometimes? No. I don't. Do I agree with the George Floyd incident? It still makes me sick to my stomach because that should have never happened. And the other officers had a duty to intervene and to stop, and they didn't. But they're being dealt with. That's over 900 miles away. The only thing I can say is that I'm only concerned about taking care of what goes on in Harrisburg here between the police and the citizens here. And I pray to God and I hope that that will never happen. And then if it does happen, I pray, you know, that we handle it in the right manner.
Yeah,
Sweep nothing under the carpet or anything like that. Address the issue and take care of it.
Yeah, I think.
Could I comment on this?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I comment on that? So absolutely hear what you're saying, Chief, and absolutely respect what you're saying. But personally, and as a protester and an activist, I'm tired of looking in hindsight. We need to get in front of these problems. Like you're saying that, you know, they're being dealt with. Well, it shouldn't have happened in the first place. And I think that's what many of us are out there protesting for, the reforms that have been, you know, bounced around in this conversation and stuff, is for tangible things that we can do to prevent these from happening instead of, oh, this is how we take care of it after the fact. And usually that after the fact, as you know very well, both chiefs, is someone ending up either dead or seriously injured. So that's just the only quick comment I wanted to make with that, is that these reforms also they're not just about looking in hindsight. They're about confronting the problems before they happen and how we can stop them from happening.
I respect that. I understand what you're saying, but anytime, you know, you're dealing with people, you're going to have incidents, regardless of what reforms you have, regardless of what laws you have, because people aren't perfect and there's going to still be incidents.
There are going to be incidents, but I think what Reverend Amar was getting at, because again, I've lived it, I've experienced it. I've lived in Greece, I've lived in France, I've lived in Czech Republic, and the manner in which police is different here. And you know, it just is more, it's less understanding and compassion. I mean, even you have made a brand of compassionate policing, Chief Carter. I mean, but it is different. The attitude that police have toward in some countries, police don't even carry weapons. It is a more officer-friendly kind of thing.
And that's true, but you got to look at, you know, this country here, everybody has a weapon. Right. Within the last 4 years, we've done taken close to 1,000 guns off the street. And those are incidents, you have to look at them. We did not use deadly force on anyone.
Right, and I think that's a great point, Commissioner, and we don't highlight that nearly enough. Actually, we should be rewarding those officers that engage in that type of activity. Now, I was going to make the same point about weapons and certainly force. You know, force is lawful. It's certainly not your first choice. We should be trying to de-escalate as many situations as we possibly can, but there are certainly instances where force is necessary. I agree with the Commissioner. It's never pretty. it never looks good. And I think, you know, we have to be careful when we use words like prevalent and defining what prevalent is, because I like to make the distinction between what was reasonable force dealing with a particular situation and the variables in that situation, and what is excessive, because they're two entirely different things. And I think more often than not, I'm certainly not blaming entirely social media, but we see small snippets of force incidents, and we automatically assume that the police officer was being overly aggressive. Now, that's not necessarily a defense, but to the commissioner's point, we see mistakes in every profession, because as long as human beings are doing this job, there's going to be mistakes made. I think the real issue and the bigger issue is making sure we hold those persons accountable for their behavior.
Very good. I wanted, so that Samia won't beat me up later on. Samia, I want to get back because I know you wanted to say something. Go ahead. We can't hear you, Samia.
Highest respect for our commissioner and the chief here. What I'm saying is the onus is not just on them. The onus is on our elected officials, the police department, and the faith community. We have failed our villages. And we need these young protesters. We need these young Black lives, just like we needed the suffragettes for my right to vote as a woman. We need these youngsters to do the protest and reform our structural racism here.
Well, let's get into one of the more difficult, controversial things. And for the record, I just want to make sure that we know we have people from different, diverse backgrounds, and we're not promoting any candidate, Brent. I know, just so you'll know, we're here having a discussion, not promoting anybody, okay? But anyway, let's get into the most difficult subject that I think we're dealing with here when we talk about defunding our police. All right. I had a hard time getting around that too. And yet I came to understand a little bit what I think is happening. So I'm going to let you guys, Brent, starting with you, what do you mean when you say defund our police, who Lord knows need more money, I think, but go ahead.
Yes, for me, defunding the police is reallocating resources. And you reallocate resources to social services, to areas that can actually influence and may be able to handle these situations. I remember one of the biggest things my biggest takeaways from the Martin Luther King Institute was when some of the officers came in and discussed the daily functions of their job. And they talked about how they have so many things and they're always being called. They're called for this, they're called for that, they're called for all of these different things. And it's too much for them. They're like, we're not trained to do this, we're not trained to do that. So why not allow other departments to be able to handle these issues? From my own personal experience, just working in the social service field prior to moving to Pennsylvania, one of the things that I found interesting in Kansas was I actually saw areas where we actually de-escalated issues that could have been differently. I've been in the house where a guy with a knife sitting there in front of me and with a mental health issue. How do I supposed to respond? Because in today's time, that could easily be a killing. We saw something similar to that in Lancaster. So you got to understand that there are departments and there are people that are trained in and out of time to be able to handle these issues. But giving them more tasks is going to require more funding. And where do we get that funding from? So if we're going to take away these different tasks from law enforcement, we need to reallocate those fundings to another institution to be able to handle those things more appropriately.
I'm going to turn to our law enforcement, but first I want to ask Pastor Chris and Samia and perhaps Pastor Robison to tell us, when you hear this term defund police, do you understand what it means? Does it bother you? Pastor Chris, you want to start?
Sure. I guess I understand what it means just from being in circles with Cole and Brent and others. But what it actually brings up, it's a larger thing for me. And I think millennials and those who are younger than me, I think we have a natural distrust for organizations, for institutions, right? That includes the church. And so I'm aware of that as a pastor, that there's a significant distrust, there's a significant what are the motives, what's the heart behind that? And so for me, it begs this larger question, what's the role of organized groups like police, like the church or faith communities, or other civic groups that are all declining in membership? And to me, it kind of points to this larger thing, but it also leads me to, even when I think about Dr. King, I think about Ebenezer Baptist Church. I think it was the church, it was Dr. King's like theological foundation, his understanding of the Bible, that led him to speak with such eloquence and speak with such authority. And so I actually think that there's something powerful in the role of the church to kind of walk with Brent and Cole, to walk with Commissioner Carter and Commissioner Bohn, because I think we have a foundation. Often I think when we use words like defunding the police, like you're saying, Joyce, no one knows what that means. No. But how can the church kind of bridge the gap? Because we have scripture that says we are to do right and to seek justice. I think the church can help bridge that. What does it mean to seek justice as a peacemaker, right? I'm not paid by the police. Thank you. I'm glad by that. And I'm also, I have a different kind of role in the community. And I think that can be a peacemaker, a bridge builder that can connect two opposites with potentially a deeper foundation. So that's what I would say, Joyce.
Barry, do you know what they mean when they say defund police? Do you agree with that or disagree?
This is an area where I personally need more education. And I think many of our people do as well. Mm-hmm. When I hear defund police, it sounds like take the money away and there's nothing there for the police. And I don't think that's what's meant, but, and as Brent began to explain, that's part of the education for me. But I think many of the folks in our faith communities don't understand that entirely. And building on what Pastor Chris said in terms of being a bridge in the community, I also go back to Director Bohn's comment of the police getting to need to know their communities. We in our faith communities need to do that too. One of the things that we have discovered, particularly in our more urban areas, is that our folks don't live in those communities anymore. They travel in from other places. And so they don't know their neighbors. They don't know those who live in and around the church or the mosque or the synagogue. And so that's an area in which we in our faith communities might be able to help begin to build those bridges by getting to know our neighbors and our communities.
Good point. Good point. Samia, did you want to talk? Do you know what the defund the police means?
Well, it does not mean abolish the police. That much I know. What for my 2 cents is take some of the money, instead of like 7 police officers, invest in the mental health profession, invest in a conflict resolution, and invest in our schools, invest in poverty that exists in these communities. That's what I cannot tell you the ratio. I'm not an expert on that, but this is in a simplistic way. I understand what defund police is.
So I saved the law enforcement officers for last because I know they don't want to be defunded. But I want them, when I heard them, when I tried to delve into this, because it really didn't make sense to me either, right? We don't want to abolish police. Who's going to protect me, right? But what I thought they meant that if we didn't ask our police to be so much, to do so much, that perhaps we could take some of the money and use it to fund mental health or fund tutoring for kids or something like that. But is that as you guys understand it, or do you have concerns that you can't afford anything to be taken away, even if your duties, if you have less duties? What are your thoughts, Chief Bohn?
Well, a number of thoughts. You know, it means, Joyce, you're right on the nose. You hit it on the nose. This means different things to different people. And certainly in Minneapolis, there was actually a thought process or communication to eliminate the police department and go into some form of private policing. Interestingly enough, within the last week and a half, those same people have now reconsidered their original thought process as they've seen a a pretty significant increase in violent crime. You know, it gets back to my earlier statement. Over the years, for those that go back a little bit, you remember a significant number of policies at a state level that reduced funding for social services. But one of the things that we need to keep in mind, and Philadelphia just released, I think it was within the last 48 hours, their partial solution to this problem, or at least taking a step, that for each one of these calls, these mental health calls, I heard the incident referenced in Lancaster, it's still going to require a police officer, and that police officer will be the first responder to that scene. Just as in medical situations in areas throughout the Commonwealth, medical personnel will not respond until scenes are secure or safe for them to provide the services that they need to provide. So as you know, and you were kind enough to run my 3 or 4 thought pieces on defunding police, I don't think that in and of itself is a solution. I think it's a reaction, but I think we need to take a step back and take a more holistic approach to government and how we are spending the money that we are spending the money on. Because there are, again, so many underlying issues that aren't addressed that I think directly impact the conversation we're having.
That's very thoughtful, Commissioner. If you were told your guys and ladies aren't going to have to go out on a third of your calls because they'll be handled by a special mental health unit that has people trained, would that convince you that you could take a little money away from your department and add it to that, or would that really not really be feasible?
Well, I want to say this here, Joyce. I've been fortunate enough to be at the table with the commissioners last year with DA Fran Chardo, and we're one of the only few agencies that have a mental health person assigned to us full time that goes out on calls with our officers. We have handled so many calls with the mental health person, and she has done a phenomenal job. I believe in the partnership. Mayor Pappenfuss, he's putting something out there where we're going to hire 3 more mental health workers that will be on every shift riding with the police. There is a real need for it. But when it comes to mental health, that's a county issue, and the county should be the ones putting the money out. And around here, they are, you know, like we're sort of matching different things like that. But Brendan Cole, I've been listening to you. I've been understanding what you guys were saying about the mental health aspect of everything, and I agree with you. You know, we went out there and we did just what you asked, you know, to allow mental health to ride with the police. And it's a great partnership, and I want to see more of it.
Yeah, and Joyce, just to add, that
Yeah.
they're doing the same thing now in Philadelphia.
That's great. Well, see, this shows that there has been something good to come from this, right? That especially when you have good law enforcement and peaceful, respectful protesters, good things can happen. And our faith community helping to lead the way. But let me do this. We are getting some questions in here. I'm going to run through a few of them, and then I'm going to probably throw the door open. But Jean is saying that she's asking is the difference between the U.S. and other nations, the lack of any gun control in the U.S. and police reliance on their guns. I mean, you guys brought up, and it's very true, all the heavy weapons that are out there. You can't go out without a gun, or heaven knows what will happen. And William is saying, how do you legislate to have people stop resisting arrest? The police have to take control of the situation before it escalates. The only thing about that question that concerns me is that, you know, if someone does have a mental health issue, or if they are having an anxiety attack, or they are having a heart attack and they don't know that they're resisting arrest, you know, how does that play into some of this? I'm going to just read these and let you guys tackle them. And Donald says the chief has hit on something. We are seeing protesters respond within hours of an event, mostly due to social media and news, but the police are not able by law to respond quickly. How are we able to have a conversation when both sides are not able to respond quickly? I don't know what that's about. I thought police can respond quickly. And finally, Susan is saying, do our young activists really think giving money to others like mental health professionals is the answer? If there is a threat, the threat needs to be dealt with first before bringing in other health professionals. You will be dead from the person with the knife if you don't bring the police in first. Defund them or cut the size of their force, and you will be taking the knife away from the mentally challenged person. Good luck with that. Well, Susan, we just heard that Brent actually did diffuse a situation with a knife, and we've heard Commissioner Carter actually express, I think, some positive, basically comments about having police, health professionals work with them because it can diffuse situations. But I threw a lot of stuff out there. Who wants to tackle what? I'm going to let you, let whoever wants to speak up first. If not, I'll call on you.
Well, I guess I will speak up.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
With the faith-based services community, I love the church. It's one of the most powerful organizations that we have, you know, and I invite all of the leaders, the church leaders, to lunch one day to come and sit down and like talk to me, you know, so how we can come up with a plan or something, you know, to get everybody back in church, to get the pews and everything filled up, because you can't walk away from God. We took prayers out of the school, you know, and that's one of the biggest problems that I can see. And I can just go on, but I won't do that there, you know. But as far, you know, as social media goes, you know, we can respond to a social media event, use of force event, but we have to vet it first, you know. We just can't just put it up, you know. There are certain steps that we have to take. Everybody has the right, you know, to use the cell phone, you know, to take pictures and to voice their opinions, but sometimes it's not the right one, and it tends to cause problems. I respect everybody's right. I respect people, and they expect the police to respond right away, but we can't, right, because we have certain processes that we have to go through.
And that's a great point, Commissioner. And, you know, Joyce, I often think, because that's often a criticism of law enforcement, we don't get do-overs. When we're issuing something, we have to make sure whatever we're putting into the public domain is correct and that is factual. And, you know, the people in our community, not that they're doing anything wrong, but they're not held to that standard.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to let our faith leaders have a final comment, because I'd really like, has this opened your mind to anything more or any other ideas for how we as people of faith can really help this situation? Can, as the commissioner said, maybe sitting down and talking with them, taking him up on his offer to really brainstorm with them. What are your thoughts about this? Do you want to start, Pastor Sledge?
Could the activists also have a final comment?
Yes, I will. I'll let you have a final comment. Boy, they are really activists.
Sure. Thanks, Joyce. I go back to a prayer service that the Mayor's Interfaith Council held in Harrisburg in January. It was held at Goodman Memorial Baptist. James Jackson was there. Commissioner Carter, you were there. And it kind of was this beautiful moment of the faith leaders and people in our city just simply lifting up prayers for Commissioner Carter and his police in one of the most deadliest months in Harrisburg's history. And so I think the biggest question I wonder, and this is to my colleagues, whom are pastors, like, what is our role in helping bridge the gap, and not to be adversaries on either side, right? To not just be so pro-police that we are tone deaf to activists, to not be so all about the protest and then we're tone deaf to police. I just wonder if there has to be a middle ground, maybe a non-anxious ground, where we can really be the community center where police officers can get to know community folks. If we're really meant to be the heart and the beat of a community, how can we leverage that for the safety of all people, for the safety of police officers and for the safety of unarmed Black and brown people in our community and whomever else it might be harmed. And so I just wonder if, like, and so the word that, Joyce, I've been thinking for months is just like, I think that we need to embody empathy as people of faith, right? That we can listen long enough to understand the perspective of someone else. That requires Brent and Commissioner Carter to have conversation and differences around the origin of police, right? Like, and for us just to listen to that, I just think it takes that. And I think so often faith leaders are scared to step in. But I actually wonder if by stepping in, we're just helping kind of create peace and to have a deeper foundation. And so I think Cole and Brent, I think you're doing incredible stuff. And I think please keep, I told Cole I have my Black Lives Matter shirt underneath, right under here. Like I'm all about that, but I also want to be in conversation with our police because I recognize that this is their livelihood and they're wanting to support their families from it. And so I just think there has to be a middle ground to uplift life on both sides. But it's going to take justice, though, and it's going to take peace, and it's going to take us working for a more better and faithful community. And so, so thank you all for your faithful work in this.
Well said, Pastor. Samia, do you want to offer some thoughts?
Not really. Again, I reiterate that I have the highest respect for 99.9% of our police officers. Just like if I want to send my child to school, and if the teacher is a sexual predator, I would like to know.
Right.
So that's how I feel the police have to be a little bit more transparent. And the structural racism, we need to handle that from grassroots on. Thank you for having me, Joyce, and the activists keep doing your good job.
All right. Barry Robison.
I think this is a great continuing step, not necessarily the first step, but a continuing step of communication. So Commissioner Carter, I would welcome an opportunity to sit down and talk with you and others and continue the dialogue in ways that we in the faith community can partner with all folks within our communities.
So before I go to our young activists, I am going to allow our law enforcement to have a few seconds, words that they want to leave, and then I'm simply going to ask them if they have hope. So go ahead. Chief Bohn.
Yes, well, I often when I see problems, I also see that there's ultimately going to be a benefit. So I'm certainly optimistic. We certainly recognize that there are things that we need to do in law enforcement on a professional end. We are certainly working with people. I love this conversation. And I often come back to, on both sides or many sides, the concept of civility, the respectful dissent, the education and learning from one another, and hopefully incorporating those in a way that's going to have meaningful benefit for our communities.
Thank you. Commissioner Carter.
I want to thank everyone here. The conversation has been great. I can feel the warmth, the love, and people wanting to come together and to get things done. Cole and Brent, I invited them to lunch. The invitation is open to you guys too. Matter of fact, Cole, you owe me lunch. And Brent and Cole, this here goes out to you and to everybody here. Anybody that wants to ride along with the police, come in, we will sign a waiver, do a background check, because we have to, so you can do that. I want you to understand what the police go through on a day-to-day basis, so that you will have firsthand knowledge of it, because I'm sitting here in this chair because I didn't agree with the way that the police were policing my neighborhood back when I was a teenager. And my father, who was a military man, told me that, don't talk about it, be about it. If you want to change something, change it from the inside out, not the outside in. I want to tell Brent and Cole, there's doors out there, just keep knocking on them because they are opening and you are being heard.
Our sons, Brent and Cole, do you have hope? Do you see that you're making a difference? Brent, you want to start? You're my son too.
Yes, thank you, Mama Joyce. But yes, I do have hope in change. I wouldn't be out on the front line if I didn't. I wouldn't have never even went to school focusing on criminal justice or anything like that. I think that this world can be different. I think it takes a combination of policy, law and order, and strategic planning. And I think if we all work together, we can get there. And even when I focus on, when we talked about things such as camera usage and citizens using there, it highlights a point of transparency and accountability. And it's something that our world is in desire and need of, simply because there's a lot of mistrust in government. There's a lot of mistrust in the police. And until we're able to build that trust and rebuild our communities, we will continue to fight these same battles. Thank you so much, Chief Carter, for your remarks. They definitely hit home with me specifically, simply because I believe that if I continue to do the work, change can really happen. Those doors and those seats will open where you're able to sit in and be able to make those changes. And I kind of look at myself similar to how you saw yourself. You saw a problem with the system, so you begin to work at the system. And I think Cole and I are in those same spaces years later, where we see a problem with the system. And we're fighting and working to make sure that we see a change with that system.
Thank you, Brent. That was well said, beautifully said. Cole, do you want to have a few minutes before I turn it over to the Dean of the Susquehanna Conference for closing prayers?
Sure. This has been a great conversation, and it's an honor to be on this panel with all of you. I've met or know almost all of you on a personal level. Chief Bohn, thank you for providing remarks, and Commissioner Carter, it really is always an honor and a pleasure to be on a panel with you. And I really wish that all of our police chiefs in Pennsylvania could look towards Chief Carter's example of working with us to come up with these changes. So that's with law enforcement. I'd like to talk just for a second about the church. What I'm about to say reminds Proverbs, the 22nd chapter, verse 8 says, "Whoever sows injustice reaps calamity, and the rod they wield in fury will be broken." Us activists are looking to break that rod. We are looking to break the rod that keeps hitting marginalized communities across this country over the head, decade after decade. We're looking to break that rod of injustice. But one thing we say at many protests is also silence is compliance. And the church, historically and also through this movement, has been too silent, in my opinion. Now, it warms my heart to see pastors like Pastor Chris Sledge and Pastor Russell Goodman of New Branches Ministries really be out there for social justice. But honestly, in our area, I've seen too much of silence. And silence is compliance. So we need the church to stand with us. We need the church to be that voice in saying, we need change. We need not just reforms, but we need all of our members to come together and love thy neighbor as thyself. That's what this is about. So when I will hope that pastors across the Susquehanna Conference will take the lead of Pastor Sledge in being that bridge to not just only form communication, but also to advocate for people who Jesus would have advocated for as well in our communities. So I see the church doing a better job. I thank Bishop Park for his leadership and his outspoken advocacy for marginalized communities, but we got to do better. We got to do better. All lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. We need to start making sure that we have movements in this country and not just moments. And that starts with the church. That starts with leaders like Mr. Robison. That starts with leaders like Pastor Sledge, Bishop Park, in joining with us and making sure we really are saying, when there is no justice in all ways economically and law enforcement wise, there really will be no peace. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. My heart is quite full right now. I want to thank all of those people that actually participated, that listened through this, whether you agreed or disagreed, you were here with us to hear it out. I want you all to know that this in no way, despite what Brent did, was promoting any politics or any candidate. That is Brent, but he's a young man. We'll talk to him later. But I just want to thank everyone. Chief Bohn, Commissioner Carter, greatest respect for you. We thank you so much for taking your time. Samia, Chris, thank you all. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Robison for closing prayer.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.
God of us all, you are God of us all. Remind us of that truth. We would ask your blessings upon our world, particularly our nation, that your spirit would so move among us that we would be reminded often and always that you are the God of us all. And in that reality, may we be moved to answer the calls of prophets who asked for justice to roll down like waters. We give you thanks for these kind of opportunities to dialogue and talk with each other, to come to understand each other. And we pray that you would bless the efforts that are being put forward now to not just make a difference, but to make a change in the way we live, in the way we treat each other, in the very fabric of our societies, that we may represent your ideals in all that we do and say. We pray now that you would watch over us and protect us until we might be together again. And we give you thanks for the blessings that you bestow. Amen.
Amen. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Joyce.
everyone.
Thank you.
Take care, Scott.
Take care. Thank you, Commissioner.
All right. Everybody else, take care.
Thank you. You too.